All right, welcome once again to Tanakh Talk Live, coming to you from Kingsland, Texas. We are here again once with Rabbi Tovia Singer from Let's Get Biblical Outreach Judaism. You can find him easily at outreachjudaism.org. And Rabbi, I got to tell you, every week I go to your website and I'm so impressed with the website layout of all these topics that you can click on. You think the show is really cool. You're really going to love the guy's website. It's just amazing. So easy to find in his book too. Love it. My wife had already decided that this week we are buying another set of the books. She said, I'm tired of you taking my copy of Let's Get Biblical. Get your own. I love it. I love it. I love it. This is good stuff. So, Tovia, you have a very prominent place in our home, and you're always welcome. Always, always, always. Thank you for joining us again, Rabbi, as well as the listeners. I feel very honored to have you here. And one thing I've never done with you, Rabbi, is my question for you is this. Can you give me on one foot, just sum it up as fast as you can, because I know you've only got a short amount of time. You've got a lecture in just a few hours. So we're going to have to keep it kind of short today for your benefit so you can get some sleep. Can you just briefly, at least in one or two sentences, tell us how you got into the outreachjudaism.org phase and what provoked you to you said on one of your broadcasts one time that your Rebbe came to you, your own rabbi came to you and said, if you only knew the Tanakh as well as you knew the New Testament. I remember that. That was great. My wife was cracking up. What led you down that path? Can you just kind of hit us with something sweet there?
So I'll share this with you. One part of it is something that I speak about often, and there's something that I've never shared publicly in my life. And I'll share this with you on this broadcast. And William, it's always great to be here, and we have a great staff at Tanakh Talk, and blessings to all of you, the listeners. Thank you so much for joining us here on air. The way I began, I grew up in a very traditional Jewish home, grew up with Holocaust survivors all around me. Both of my grandparents who managed to come to the United States prior to World War II and prior to 1924, after which it was almost impossible for Jews to enter the United States. If you didn't get here before then, essentially your fate was sealed, but all their brothers and sisters, everyone was wiped out by the Germans. And that's the worldview that I had. When I encountered missionaries targeting Jews as a 16-year-old on the streets of New York, Jews for Jesus in particular, I was just shocked. Now, I know many of the listeners here, some of you grew up in the Christian world, so you won't be able to relate to this, but those of you who grew up in a traditional Jewish home, I think you sometimes begin to argue with these missionaries. It's the kind of conversation that went absolutely nowhere very, very quickly. At the time, it was like a bomb went off inside of me. And one of the things I've said is I didn't hear a voice, I didn't see any visions, but I knew that I had to do something to respond. This could not go on, that there are people who are trying to convert Jews to Christianity, many of whom are Jewish themselves. In very much the same vein, the way we see people who are siding with Hamas, who are anti-Israel, and many of these organizations, like the International Solidarity Movement, was founded by Adam Shapiro, a Jew. It blows our minds away that Jews like Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, but it just blew. There was like a bomb went off inside of me, and I knew I had to do something. I never dreamed. I want to make that clear. I never dreamed that I would take it to this level, but it was in Israel, not long after my first encounter with a missionary, that I encountered a Jew who had converted to Christianity from Long Island, spent my entire Holy Land vacation on him, studied with him, and he eventually did return back to the God of Israel. That's the part I've talked about, discussed many times. My life went through a radical transformation in that in my world in the 60s, growing up in Brooklyn, if you haven't, you won't be able to relate to this, but it was not fashionable by any stretch of the imagination to be an Orthodox Jew in the 1960s. It just wasn't. You were considered outside, very much outside the norm. Today we have a Treasury Secretary who's an observant Jew. That would have been unheard of at the time, and I grew up with an enormous amount of anti-Semitism, and I pretty much wrote off the Gentiles. But it was later on in my 20s that I encountered people who were not born Jewish, who just really good people, Christians, devout evangelical Christians. But if you can get past the Jesus part and really talk to them, they're really great people. I was convinced of this, and I had forged some very valuable relationships, and it made me rethink everything. It was a paradigm shift completely, and I realized I realized that these people were created in the image of God. They deserve better. Until then, I really didn't think they did, because I thought Gentiles were crazy. Because of the anti-Semitism I experienced, they behaved so badly that I was only interested in helping Jews. I didn't care about Gentiles. I'm being very frank. William, I really didn't like you in particular. I'm kidding, but
so I should disregard that last email
so,
you sent.
no.
No, I'm just kidding. That was a joke.
So here, no, I'm the funny one, not you. Okay? So he's trying to stick his nose, trying to get a bigger commission. It won't work. Okay, now, so when I apprehended that these people, non-Jews, Christians, many of them very fine people, once you leave New York, once you leave the ghetto, I realized that I asked a very simple question: is Hashem happy that these people who are created in His image, good people, does He delight that they're worshiping a man as God? And the only conclusion I can come to was no. That can't possibly make Hashem happy. And it was a radical idea, because the basic norm of the Jewish people was not to in any way try to reach out with the message of Torah, with the message of the Bnei Noach to the non-Jewish world. For 2,000 years we've been living under unimaginable persecution, so the basic attitude that Jewish people have is that they do not want to in any way call the fundamental tenets of the church into question. That's very important. And most Jews would never do anything like that. And that happened as a result of 2,000 years of just getting stuck just shoved in a gas chamber, not because you went and shared your faith, just because you are a Jew. But I realized that those days are over, that in America, I'm living in a place where there have been other places throughout our exile that Jews have been tolerated. But in the United States, Jews aren't just tolerated. I, as a Jew, I grasped, have the same rights as a Christian. As an American citizen, I have the exact same rights as any Christian. That's unprecedented in the history of Jewish diaspora over the last 2,000 years. And then there was one other event. I've never shared this with anyone, and I will right now. I was driving my car in New York City, and I was listening to a radio show, a very famous radio show host. He died last year. His name is Bob Grant. Very famous, and he was really one of the fathers of conservative news talk radio. He was extremely popular, and he was on the largest station in the largest market, very pro-Israel, but he enjoyed having folks on from Jews for Jesus. He's of Italian extraction. I didn't know what it was. And he had David Brickner on, who was the head of Jews for Jesus, one of the heads at the time. So quite a number of years ago. And he was sort of debating a caller who said, well, the caller who was Jewish said, well, Jesus is not the Messiah for Jews. Now, the reason the caller said that is because the Jews are in a very precarious situation in our exile, even in the United States. We've just witnessed Obama tell Bibi, if when you come into the United States, don't bother coming to the White House. Jewish people are reluctant to say that Christianity is a religion whose fundamental tenets are wrong because of thousands of years of exile. And David Brickner responded correctly, and he said, well, what do you mean he's not the Messiah for Jews, but it's okay for Gentiles? He either is or he isn't. Now, Brickner had exploited a sensitivity that Jewish people have, in that the norm was, it's just not for Jews, that's all. But he was technically correct, but of course, Jews is just a very in-your-face organization. And I realize in a sense that Brickner is right, in a sense that he either is or he isn't, this kind of, so that's really what, I realized at that point that Christians listening to that radio show, hearing a Jew call in saying he's not the Messiah for Jews, but it's okay for Gentiles, that made no sense at all. That kind of statement made no sense at all to the Christian listener or to Jew who's in the church. That just confirms it, that these Jews are off base because they don't get the sensitivity that Jews have. And I realized at that moment that, you know what, Gentiles, Christians, really do want the truth. And they just want you to be honest and sincere with them, but they don't want the applesauce kind of, it's okay for Gentiles, it's not okay for Jews. He either is or he is not. And what's happened is thousands and thousands of souls of Christians later, of course, I found out that was correct. That in fact, Christians want to hear why doesn't Judaism accept the Christian Messiah? And they want to hear compelling answers. And that's really what my life is about. I just wrote 2 books on it. I have an audio series that changed, thank God, Hashem, has made it possible to save a lot of lives. So that's the answer. I never ever told that story about David Brickner on the Bob Grant show going back many years ago.